My family kicked me out at 16 to give my room to my favorite sister's baby. I lived in a tent all winter. But years later, I discovered they stole my $50,000 inheritance and sued them. They had to sell their house to pay me. I'm 28 years old. I work as an event coordinator, and honestly, I need to tell this story because what happened to me basically defined my entire life. And until recently, I hadn't had the courage to put it into words. The thing is, I was the unwanted twin. And I'm not being dramatic or exaggerating. My parents literally told me that to my face more than once. Jennifer, my twin sister, was the star of the family, the princess, the one who could do whatever she wanted. And I was, I don't know, like a piece of furniture that got in the way at home. I guess I should start from the beginning, so you understand how I got to where I am now. For as long as I can remember, Jennifer was always the favorite. I don't know exactly why. I never understood it. I just know that's how it was. When we were like 5 or 6 years old, it was already obvious. Jennifer got all the new toys, the nice clothes, the hugs, the attention, and I got whatever was left over, which is to say, nothing. I gave me the clothes Jennifer didn't want anymore. And when I complained, my mom told me to stop being ungrateful. On birthdays, because obviously we shared a date, my mom would throw these huge parties with Jennifer's favorite theme, princesses or whatever she liked that year, and they didn't even ask me what I wanted. The presents were like that too. Jennifer would get tons of things, and I'd maybe get 1 or 2 cheap things that looked like they were bought last minute at the supermarket. You know what it feels like to watch your sister open present after present while you sit there pretending you don't care? It's horrible, I swear. The only person who really loved me was my grandfather, my mom's dad. He was an older man, already retired when I was little, and he always treated me the same as Jennifer. Well, actually, he treated me better, because I think he also noticed how my parents treated me. He'd take me out on weekends, buy me ice cream, ask me how school was going. Those normal things that parents are supposed to do, but mine never did with me. I remember when I was like 10 years old, I asked him why my parents didn't love me, and he hugged me and told me, of course they loved me, they were just bad at showing it. But I already knew he was lying to make me feel better. Grandpa was the only good thing in my life back then. Literally the only thing. When I was 14, Grandpa got sick. It was something with his heart. I don't remember exactly what because nobody explained anything to me. But I do remember going to the hospital and seeing him there connected to all those machines. He died about 3 months later, and that completely destroyed me. I cried for weeks, and my parents basically ignored me, told me to stop with the drama, that it was enough already. Jennifer didn't even seem sad. Honestly, she was more worried about her boyfriend at the time or something. After the funeral, I found out that Grandpa had left me some money in his will. I know exactly how much because I was 14 and didn't understand much about those things, but my parents said they were going to save it for me until I was of age. I should have suspected something right then, but I was a kid and I trusted that at least about that they wouldn't lie to me. Things got worse when we were 16. Jennifer started dating this guy who was, I don't know, Mike or something, who was 19 years old, and my parents acted like it was the most normal thing in the world for their 16-year-old daughter to date a 19-year-old. They wouldn't even let me go out with friends to the plaza, but Jennifer could do whatever she wanted, as always. So Jennifer got pregnant. I remember perfectly the day she announced it. My parents were in shock for like 2 seconds, and then my mom started crying, saying she was going to be a grandmother, that she was so excited, and my dad was already planning how they were going to rearrange the house for the baby. I was there, at the dining room table, watching the whole scene thinking, seriously? This is what happens when your favorite daughter ruins her life at 16? You celebrate it? But what came next was worse. Much worse. A week after Jennifer announced the pregnancy, my parents called me into the living room. My dad told me, "We need your room for the baby. Jennifer is going to need space for her and the child." I just stood there like an idiot, not really understanding what he was telling me. I asked him, "And where am I going to sleep?" And my mom, with that face she made when she was playing the victim, told me I could sleep on the couch in the living room or find somewhere else. I said it wasn't fair. That Jennifer was the one who got pregnant. Why did I have to pay the consequences? And my dad exploded. He yelled at me that I was selfish, that I only thought about myself, that Jennifer needed family support, and that if I didn't like it, I could get out of the house. Just like that, with those exact words. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was 16 years old. I was still in school. I had no job or money or anything, and my dad was telling me to get out. I tried to reason with them. I told them please, that I had nowhere to go, but they didn't care. My mom just kept saying I was being dramatic, that surely I could stay with a friend. The problem was I didn't have really close friends. They'd never let me socialize much, and the few people I talked to at school weren't the kind of friendship where I could ask them to let me live with them. Jennifer was there during the whole argument, not saying anything, just looking at her phone, as if it had nothing to do with her. In the end, they told me I had until the weekend to leave. It was Wednesday. I remember I went up to my room, well, to what had been my room my whole life, and I started crying like I had never cried before. I didn't know what to do. I literally had no options. I called the few people I knew, but nobody could help me, either because they lived in small houses with big families, or because their parents didn't want to bring a stranger into their house. I was desperate, terrified, and worst of all, I still couldn't believe it. I kept thinking that maybe my parents were going to change their minds, but they didn't. Saturday came, and my parents started taking my stuff out of my room. They wouldn't let me take many things, only what would fit in 2 suitcases. The rest they were going to throw away or donate, according to them. I ended up sleeping in a tent in the backyard of the house. Yeah, you read that right. At 16 years old, I was living in a tent in my own parents' backyard because they had kicked me out to give my room to my sister's baby. It was October. It was already getting cold, and I was out there with a thin sleeping bag and basically nothing else. I still had to go to school, so I'd wake up every morning freezing, sneak into the house to shower early, before my parents woke up, and run off so I wouldn't run into them. That winter was brutal. There were days where the temperature dropped to like 0 degrees, and I was in that tent shivering all night, unable to sleep well, trying to do homework with a flashlight because, obviously, I didn't have electricity out there. My grades started dropping because I couldn't concentrate. I was tired all the time, hungry because I barely had money for food, and emotionally destroyed. Some days I thought about just giving up, dropping out of school and, I don't know, going to live on the street or something. But something inside me refused to give my parents that satisfaction. I got a job at a bakery called Frank's Bakery. It belonged to the owner whose name was Frank. Obviously. An older guy, kind of gruff, but with a good heart. At first, he only let me do cleaning and deliveries on weekends. But when he found out about my situation, because one day, I arrived with my hands almost frozen, and he asked me what happened, and I ended up telling him everything, he gave me more hours. He let me work after school too, and paid me in cash so I could buy food. Frank was rough in the way he talked, but he was a good person. He let me take home the bread that was left over at the end of the day so I'd have something to eat. I think I'd been living in the tent for like 3 months when Frank told me he had a small room above the bakery that he wasn't using, that it was full of boxes and old stuff, but if I cleaned it, I could stay there. I almost started crying right then and there. I asked him how much rent he wanted, and he said nothing. Just keep working well and keep the room clean. It took me 2 days to clean that room. But when I finished, it was like a palace, compared to the tent. It had an old mattress that Frank got me, a lamp, and even a small heater. For the first time in months, I could sleep without freezing. I could do my homework in a lit place. I could breathe. I lived there for 2 years while I finished school. I worked at the bakery every afternoon and on weekends, and Frank taught me to bake too, not just clean. He paid me little, but it was enough to buy food and save a bit. I got another job too. As a babysitter for a family that lived nearby, I'd watch their 2 kids some nights a week. Basically, I worked all the time, but I was determined to get ahead. I hadn't talked to my parents again since I moved above the bakery, and they never tried to contact me either. I'd see Jennifer sometimes in town because it was small. She was always with her baby and her boyfriend. That guy who worked dead-end jobs and looked miserable. And she didn't talk to me either. It was like I didn't exist to them, like I had never been part of that family. I graduated from school at 18. I went to the ceremony alone because, obviously, my family didn't go. Frank closed the bakery early that day to go see me, receive my diploma. He was the only person there for me, and that meant more than I can explain. After graduating, I got a full-time job at an office. I was just a receptionist, but it paid better than the bakery. I kept living above the bakery because the rent was free, and that way I could save everything I earned. Frank told me not to worry, to stay there as long as I needed, and I'm eternally grateful to that man because he basically saved my life. For the next few years, I worked like crazy. I got another job besides the receptionist one. I worked at a retail store on weekends, and I also did freelance graphic design work that I'd learned by watching tutorials on the internet. I slept like 5 hours a night. I had no social life. I didn't go anywhere. Every cent I earned, I saved. People probably thought I was crazy, but I had a clear goal. I wanted to buy my own house. I wanted to have something that was completely mine, a place where nobody could kick me out ever again, where I made the rules. That idea kept me going even when I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. It took me 6 years. 6 years of working multiple jobs, of not buying new clothes, of not eating out, of basically not having a life. But at 24, I had saved enough for a down payment on a house. It wasn't a mansion or anything. It was a modest 3-bedroom house on the outskirts of town, but it was mine. When I signed the papers at the real estate agent's office, I cried. The guy probably thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. It was the first time in my life that I had something that really belonged to me, something nobody could take from me. I moved into my house and spent the first few weeks just fixing it up. I didn't have much furniture at first, just the basics, but I didn't care. Every night I'd lie down in my own bed in my own house and couldn't believe I'd done it. Frank came to visit me once and told me he was proud of me, and that made me cry again because it was probably the first time anyone had said something like that to me. It had been like 6 months since I bought the house when one day I was in the kitchen making breakfast, and I heard a knock on the door. I opened it, and there were my parents, Jennifer, her husband, or boyfriend, or whatever he was at that point, and 2 small kids. I assume Jennifer's. I just stood there not knowing what to say. I literally hadn't talked to them in years. I didn't even know they knew where I lived. My mom tried to hug me, and I stepped aside. She asked me how I was, with that fake sweet voice she used when she wanted something, and I just asked them what they wanted. My dad got right to the point, as always. He said they'd heard I'd bought a house, that it looked very nice, and that they needed a favor. Apparently, Jennifer and her husband had lost their apartment because they couldn't pay rent. My parents were having money problems too, and basically they wanted to move in with me. All 5 of them, well, actually 6 counting the 2 kids. I stood there staring at them, unable to believe what I was hearing. I asked them if they were serious, and my dad said yes, that we were family and family supports each other. I almost laughed in his face. I told them no, definitely not. That after everything they'd done to me, they had no right to ask me for anything. My mom started with her victim act, saying I was being cruel. How could I deny them help when they'd raised me my whole life? I reminded her that they'd kicked me out at 16, that they'd made me live in a tent in winter, that they'd basically abandoned me, and she said I was exaggerating, that they never kicked me out, that I'd left by my own choice. Can you believe it? They were standing there rewriting history like I was the crazy one. Jennifer finally spoke and said I'd always been selfish, that I only thought about myself, and that now that I had something I was being mean by not sharing it with the family. I told her she'd always had everything, that my parents had given her everything while they treated me like garbage, and that if she was in trouble, it was her own problem, not mine. Her husband tried to say something too, something about how I should understand they had kids to support, but I interrupted him and told them all to get off my property, or I was going to call the police. My dad started yelling at me, saying I was ungrateful, that after everything they'd done for me, this was how I repaid them. And I simply closed the door in their faces. I heard them out there yelling for several minutes before they finally left. I sat on the living room floor and started shaking, not from fear, but from rage. I had worked so hard to get where I was. I had suffered so much. And they had the nerve to show up and ask me to rescue them after treating me like nothing my whole life. I thought that was the end of it. But 2 weeks later, I received some legal papers. Jennifer was suing me, claiming the house was family property, because supposedly my parents had helped with the down payment and therefore she had a right to a portion. It was a total lie. They hadn't given me a single cent. I had paid every penny for that house with my own work. But the lawsuit was there anyway. I hired a lawyer named Karen, a woman about 50 years old who didn't mess around, and I explained the whole situation to her. Karen investigated everything, got my bank records showing every deposit and every withdrawal, got letters from Frank and other employers confirming that I had worked and saved that money alone, and was preparing the defense when she discovered something. When reviewing the property documents and cross-referencing information, Karen found that my parents had stolen the inheritance my grandfather had left me. Remember I told you Grandpa had left me money? Well, it turns out it wasn't just a little money. It was like $50,000, a considerable amount that he'd saved his whole life specifically for me. And my parents had kept it. They'd forged documents or something to transfer the money to their account when I was 14. When Karen told me, I felt like I was going to have a breakdown. Not only had they treated me horribly my whole life, not only had they kicked me out of the house, but they'd also stolen the inheritance from the only person who had loved me. It was too much, literally too much to process. Karen asked me if I wanted to countersue for fraud and theft, and I said yes, without thinking twice. It wasn't just about defending my house anymore, it was about making them pay for everything they'd done to me. The legal process was long, like 6 months or something, and it was horrible. I had to give testimony about my whole childhood, about how they treated me, about when they kicked me out, about everything. Jennifer and my parents also testified, and obviously they lied about everything. Said I was a problem child, that I'd always been difficult, that I'd left home because I wanted to. But Karen was good, really good, and she had all the evidence. She had the bank records showing my parents had received Grandpa's inheritance and kept it. She had testimonies from Frank and other people who had seen me living in the tent and working like crazy to survive. She had everything. The day of the final trial, I was so nervous, I felt like I was going to throw up. The judge listened to everything, saw all the evidence, and in the end, issued the ruling. First, he completely dismissed Jennifer's lawsuit against me, basically telling her she had no right to my house and that her lawsuit was frivolous. Second, and this was the best part, he ruled in my favor on the countersuit. My parents had to return the $50,000 from Grandpa's inheritance, plus interest accumulated over all those years, plus legal costs, plus damages for the fraud. The total was like $75,000 or something. The judge also said something about how my case was one of the clearest cases of parental neglect and financial abuse he'd seen, and basically scolded them right there in court. My parents were pale, Jennifer was crying, and I felt like an enormous weight had been lifted off me. It wasn't just about the money, though obviously the money helped. It was because finally, someone with authority was telling them that what they'd done to me was wrong, that I wasn't crazy, that they were the ones who were wrong. It was a validation I'd needed for years. After the trial, my parents tried to contact me several times. My mom left me voicemails crying, saying she was sorry, that she'd been a bad mother, please forgive her. But I knew she was only saying it because I'd won, not because she really regretted it. My dad sent me a text message saying they didn't have a way to pay me all that money, that it was going to ruin them, and I simply responded that it wasn't my problem. Jennifer also tried to communicate, saying I was destroying the family, but I blocked her everywhere. Eventually, I got all the money they owed me. They had to sell their house to pay me, which I know sounds cruel, but honestly, I didn't care. They'd made me live in a tent at 16. I think they could survive looking for a smaller apartment. I used that money to finish paying off my house completely. No mortgage, invested another part, and kept the rest as an emergency fund. Now, 2 years after all that, I'm doing well. I work in event coordination, something I discovered I liked and that I'm good at. I have my house paid off, I have savings, I have a stable life. I haven't talked to my family again, and I have no intention of doing so. Sometimes people ask me why I don't forgive, why I don't try to reconcile. And honestly, they don't know what they're talking about. Forgiving doesn't mean allowing people who hurt you to come back into your life, especially when they've never shown real remorse. My family had 16 years to treat me well, and they chose not to. They had years after that to apologize, and they didn't. They only showed up when they wanted something from me. That's not family. That's convenience. Frank died last year. It was peaceful, just old age, and I went to his funeral. I was practically the only person there who wasn't his direct family, but he'd been more family to me than my own parents. He left the bakery to his nephew, but he left me a letter where he told me he was proud of how far I'd come, that he always knew I'd be okay because I was a fighter. I still have that letter saved. I read it sometimes when I have difficult days. I guess if there's something I learned from all this, it's that blood family isn't always what matters. Frank, who had no obligation to me, gave me more support and affection in a few years than my parents in my whole life. I learned you can survive horrible things if you're willing to work hard, that justice exists even though sometimes it takes a while to arrive, and that you don't owe anything to people who treated you like garbage just because they share your blood. My life isn't perfect. There are still days where I feel lonely, where I wonder what it would have been like to have a normal family that loved me. But I'm at peace with what happened. I did the best I could with the cards I was dealt, and I think I came out pretty well. My house is mine, my life is mine, and nobody can take it from me. That's enough.